little bit. Okay. It's probably too focused on Paul, but still. The pot.
Oh, no. Yeah, I'm that good. Oh, yeah. You should be feeling something.
How does a panel 2 work?
What? We don't really know. It works.
Consensus?
No, just if there's a split, there's a split.
Right, fair.
Who gets the win points in for?
Oh, I'll have to make a considerable
Don't
leeway.
worry. We'll decide it by paper, scissors, rock. It's the fairest way.
Right.
Alright, shall we
You're
start?
the Elsa.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or, yeah. Yeah, hold it. I'm trying to write Paul and talk at the same
Okay,
time.
so you guys ready?
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, we say this debate, Madam Speaker, we say this debate takes place in a context of a world which is becoming increasingly violent. We have seen violent crime rates among youth soar over the past 20 years or so. We also say that it takes place in a world where we think that there is less justification for confrontational manners of resolving conflicts. What I'm going to talk about today, and what we feel the onus on the affirmative team to prove, is that video games increase the user's propensity to be violent. Now, obviously, the degree of this harm depends on the context. So, for example, if it's like someone who's living in a environment where they're otherwise treated well and they're at low risk of committing crime, then that harm might only be the fact that they're more confrontational in situations with their family or situations with other people. We still say that's a harm that needs to be addressed. But we also say that the other harm that can arise is that when someone is not in a good environment and has at a high risk of increasing crime, that these sorts of things might lead them to do extreme things like commit violence against others, do things like join gangs and the like. So what my second speaker today is going to talk about is why violent video games reduce individuals' effective participation into society, and I'm going to look at why it increases their propensity to be confrontational and violent. And I'm going to look at that in 3 ways. I'm firstly going to look at why video games in their inherent nature cause violence. Secondly, I'm going to look at why they create the perception society is more violent than it is and why that's a bad thing. And thirdly, I'm going to look at why the nature of people who mainly play violent video games mean that risk is exposed. So why does the video game itself incentivize violence? Well, the first way that it does this is that video games necessarily have a narrative. What happens is that the user is a character in a game. They might be the good guy, they might be the bad guy, but the aim of the game is to shoot as many people as possible until they win the game. Why does this justify violence? Because when they put themselves in those shoes, it gives them a reason to say, oh, it's okay to do that as long as I'm fighting against someone. We say that's a bad message to send, that the way to resolve conflict is to do it through the might makes right solution. But the second reason why we say that it incentivizes violence is because the nature of the games means that you're actively rewarded for actually shooting someone, for like punching someone. Why is that? Because when you do that, the game or whatever, you get points from doing it. You get a point from doing that. And that's really significant in this debate, Mr. Speaker, because studies show that the direct reward and correlation and do an action is the biggest way that young children learn. When they actively get rewarded for something, that justifies it in their head and makes them more likely to do it. It's the feedback mechanism from taking that action and then being rewarded from that. So we say that when you shoot someone and you gain points for that, that associates that in that person's head as a good thing. Moreover, we say that you take on that character, so it's not just the character that gets rewarded for shooting people, it's you, the user themselves, who gets rewarded for shooting people. We say this in turn, and moreover, the third reason we say it is because you socialise violence in a setting where violence otherwise wouldn't take place, because you usually play these sorts of games in your home or whatever, and in bringing violence into the home, you normalise it in that benign environment. And we say, why is this a bad thing? Because for these three reasons, people internalise the idea that it's okay to resolve conflicts through this might makes right, through this violent scenario. So we say that in doing so, that they're more likely when they interact with other people to actually, resort to physical violence, or think that there necessarily has to be a winner and a loser in a confrontation, rather than another solution of sorting out confrontations where you have, say, a more consensus type resolution. Now I'm going to move on to the second idea of why video games create the perception that society is more violent than it is. Because what we say is that when you have young impressionable people playing such a game, is that you give them the idea that, that all around the world and that society is more violent than really is, because I've proven to you why the games give you a narrative that young kids would want to believe is true, because they provide a clear, simple storyline or game for them to follow, and in doing so, this creates them the idea that society is more violent than it really is. And why is this a bad thing? Because if you think that society is more violent than it really is, then it's a perfectly rational reaction for that user to then have a greater propensity to use violence. Why is that? Because they think that everyone else is going to use that violence. It's just like the situation you have in America with gun usage, where what happens is that because they know that everyone else, like a criminal, is more likely to be using a gun or whatever, then everyone else feels they need to have a gun. So you essentially sort of get a race, and you get a race to sort of build up your own weaponry, or be ready in situations to use this confrontational method of resolving resolutions rather than the more consensus type things. The third point that we want to make clear in this debate is that we want to particularly analyse why the people who use video games are usually most at risk. Now, what we see in most developed countries is that there are certain restrictions on who can use these games. For example, like Grand Theft Auto might be R18 or whatever. These particular games might be restricted. But usually for these restrictions to work, we all know, ladies and gentlemen, that this requires the parents to actually be supportive of that restriction, or require the parents to monitor their children when they play their games. So what this means is that the games which are restricted by government regulation or whatever are actually given to the hands of children who are most at risk and most vulnerable, because their parents are the ones who are not going to be monitoring what particular games they should be playing. Their parents are the ones, if they're not living in an environment where they've got parents who are doing their job and looking out for them, then they're the ones who are most likely to be playing these video games. Moreover, we say the nature of children's minds, like when they're younger, your mind is obviously more willing to take on new ideas, and you're more impressionable. So we say that in effect, when you're giving people who are already in a bad situation, who have already got a bad start in life, are at high risk, when you're giving them an incentive to commit violence, then we say that that's why these video games are a particular harm. We say that they incentivize violence. We say that this has massive flow-on effects. Madam Speaker, we're very happy to say that they are a threat to society, and because we don't want to continue down this idea of might makes right. Thank you.